founded in 1912. The City Club has over 130 programs every year on issues of different topics and different things throughout. He's a trained journalist and a civic engagement innovator. Dan was a co-founder of the Civic Commons, a Knight Foundation initiative to design a social media environment that explicitly helps civil and civic dialogue. Prior to that, he was the host of a public radio program for The Sound of Ideas on 90.3 WCPN Idea Stream. He was a former English teacher. He's also the co-author of the best-selling book, Teachers Have It Easy, The Big Sacrifices and Small Salaries of America's Teacher, which provided the basis of the 2011 documentary American Teacher. Dan serves on the board of the Teacher Salary Project, the advisories boards for Facing History, New Tech High School, and Borderlight, and International Theatre Festival. He is a graduate of UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. He lives in Shaker with his wife and 3 children, and I met Dan when his eldest son came into my PSR when he was like 4 years old, and ever since then I've had his kids, and it's had a great relationship. So he's a great friend.
Welcome, Dan.
Is this stable? Like, if I sit, can I sit on
You
it?
can sit there. Okay.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Good, good. So I'm Dan, and it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I don't know all of your names, so on the count of 3, just tell me your name real quick, and we'll do it all at once. That's quicker than the other way. So 1, 2, 3.
Joe.
Okay, great. I think some of you didn't participate down here, and that's all right. That's on you. So I am, as Joe said, I did used to teach high school. I love teaching high school, so it's always exciting to get to hang out with smart young people. I'm going to tell you a story that involves 2 conversions, one successful, sort of, one not, and one and then acceptance in the end. And it's a long journey. It's a journey that I feel that I'm still on, but it began when I was your age. So I'm not Catholic. Joe didn't say that. I'm not Catholic. I have 3 Catholic children. I have a Catholic wife and a Catholic family. And I come to church here at St. Dominic's roughly, I don't know, Tom, what do you think? Like maybe 45 Sundays a year, something like that. Maybe. That's probably a little generous. So I say that I'm Jewish. I say I'm the Jewishener. Thank you. Gets a laugh sometimes. You guys are a tough crowd. But at any rate, when I was growing up, we were Jewish. My mother's Jewish, so that makes me Jewish. That's just the way Judaism works. But I say that we weren't really Jewish. I didn't go to synagogue, so we were sort of Jew-ish. And we that's a big laugh for that. But I grew up in suburban New Jersey, and it seemed like when I was growing up, it seemed like everybody else had a faith, right? So there were all these kids who went to something on Sundays called CCD. I had no idea what that stood for. I still don't know, but it's something, I think it rhymes with PSR or something like that. It basically is like PSR for Jersey. And then there were these other kids who were going to Hebrew school on Saturdays, and they all had a thing. And we didn't. My brothers and I, and in our family, we were secular. We didn't do any of that at all. And so I spent a lot of my childhood figuring that I was probably missing out on something, and I didn't really know what it was I was missing out on. But it seemed like everybody else had a thing. We didn't have a thing, so obviously I was the weird one. And that's kind of how I think a lot of people tend to experience their childhood and their adolescence that way, feeling like they're the weird one. So if we're all the weird one, then maybe none of us is, but you're still unique, it's okay. So when I was 15 years old, a friend of ours invited, are we recording this? Are we like Facebook Live right now? Like, no, we're just recording this, okay. Is this YouTube material? Okay, oh, great. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good to know. All right. And so that's it. No, so a friend of ours invited us to go to this camp, a week-long summer camp, up at Lake Saranac in New York. He's like, oh, it's totally fun. There's like parasailing and water skiing. We're gonna have such a great time. I was like, sure, that sounds great. So my twin brother and I get on this bus with our friend, and we head up to Lake Saranac. And we're going to some camp that's organized by some group called Young Life. We don't know anything about it, right? Has anybody ever heard of Young Life before? Okay, good. That's a good sign, I think. Young Life, it turns out that Young Life is this kind of hardcore evangelical Christian sort of thing, and they work to support. I went back and looked at this one time. I think the last time when I talked to Tom, you had me speak to a group of like grown-ups, and I went back and looked at their website and found it vaguely horrifying. But but their deal is about bringing people to accept Jesus Christ as their own personal Lord and Savior in those sort of evangelical, born-again kinds of terms. I had no idea that's what I signed up for, and we got there, and like you get off the bus and they love bomb you. And there's like everybody's like, hey, like literally singing to you as you get off the bus, like a literal love bomb. And then you're like, oh my God, there's something. This is huge. And so I never really thought about my own personal spirituality, the state of my sinful soul, any of that stuff. And suddenly it was being like, jammed. Like I was just confronted with it, and wasn't ready for that. Had no basis for understanding what was going on. And I am such a dork about so many things, and I'll just like, if there's enough really cool people doing something, I'm like, I'm all in. Let's do this. And by the end of the week, I mean, it was a fun week. Like that whole thing about like parasailing and water skiing, like that wasn't a lie. And there was like a hot tub and a pool and all these really cute girls, and like you're like, wow, I just want to do this for the rest of my life. And so by the end of the week, they do this whole build-up, right? Like every night, and you're exhausted, but it's like vaguely like brainwashing. So like you're just having all this fun, you're not sleeping, you're up until midnight every night, and you're singing Amazing Grace and all these other groovy tunes, and they're gradually like building up this whole thing where they're like revealing to you just what a horrible person you are, and how Jesus is your own personal Savior. So by the end of the week, Friday night, I'm like on the floor of some like bunk, like there's bunk beds all over. There's some like counselor who I never knew before, have never spoken to since, and we're like reading like John, the Gospel according to John together, and like I'm weeping, and I left there thinking like basically like, okay, I'm born again. I wasn't expecting that, but here I am. So needless to say, that went over really well with my mom. And so I was 15 years old, about to start my junior year in high school, and as if high school is not hard enough and weird enough and awkward enough, like I've now decided that I'm layering on like born again on top of all of that. And I was going to a private high school in New Jersey, and then just like all of this, like just trying to figure out how to integrate this new understanding of myself. And I had the my New American Standard Version of the Bible, and I read every night, and I was like on my knees praying at night, and I had like these little books that would that would help me through this journey, like read this passage and here's what you're supposed to think about it, now journal a little bit about it, and it all is like geared to to sort of keep you as this nice little baby Christian growing into like a like bigger Christian and whatever. It was really weird, and then there was no, I got back to Jersey, and there was no. It's not like I had like this ready structure of network or anything like that. My twin brother, who's like much more skeptical, much more easygoing than I am, was like, yeah, it was a fun week, and he didn't do the whole born again thing. He just went water skiing and hung out with cute girls and didn't take it that seriously. But I everything I do then and now, I guess I take it really seriously. So I had to do all this church shopping, you know, like my dad, he was great. He was like, okay, well, we're gonna go check out these churches. And then eventually I find this Episcopal church. And there was another organization, Focus, which was a Fellowship of Christians at Universities and Schools, which was still a little like heavy on the Protestant side of things, but not as awful as Young Life. And there was a guy there, and he was super nice, and he used to drive like 20 minutes to pick me up. The church was like right around the corner from me, but he would drive 20 minutes to pick me up and then take me to church on Sundays, which was like super sweet. Great guy. I still remember his name, Dave Collins, but we're not really in touch on Facebook. But if you're watching this, Dave, solid. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to an Episcopal church, but it's like if you take like all the ritual stuff about Catholic Church and all the kind of progressive side of Protestantism and kind of put it together, that's sort of what it was. And there was this Episcopal priest. There were two priests at this church. One was not great. He just he seemed to like his homilies. He was one of those guys who does a homily and just kind of wings it. He's sort of like, well, I'm just gonna, I've read it and I prayed about it, so I'm just gonna say stuff. And then there was another guy who prepared his homilies, and he was very intellectual, and and he had cerebral palsy too, so he was kind of hard to understand, but he was so passionate and he was so intelligent, and I loved listening to his homilies. And I became an altar server there, and I would swing the incense. They were really into incense in that church. And so I would swing the thing around. It was super fun. But I was never fully comfortable with, I was like, okay, so now I'm in the in-crowd, but I was never really comfortable with it. I still felt like I was missing out on something. Because I think all of you, I'm guessing that 90% of you, or maybe that I shouldn't put a real figure, a data point on that, as Hillary Clinton will tell you. But a bunch of you have sort of grown up in Catholicism, and so you just feel comfortable. It's like just the world you live in. And you question it sometimes, but it's sort of the world you live in. I never had that, so I was always like, is this right? Am I supposed to do this? And I had this experience too, where if you're really reading the Bible, and you really believe what you're being told in the Bible, it's like, well, I got to sell everything. I got to sell everything and serve the poor, right? There's no in between. If you're going to fully accept all of that, that's how it felt to me. And that the gulf between how I perceived all of it and how it felt like people who grew up in the tradition perceived it was really apparent to me during a gap year that I took between high school and college. And I was in England for a year, and the Episcopal Church is sort of connected to the Anglican Church. So I was like, oh, this is great. I'll just, I'll dive into that, and then I'll be super authentic. And I'll be an Anglican instead of just an Episcopal. Old world, damn, awesome. And it was, so I was going through this process. I went to all these confirmation classes, and I was taking religious studies classes, and these confirmation classes, I would go, and I was the only person who had chosen to be there. Every other one of the 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds who were in the class were being forced to be there by their parents, and they were being paid to be there by their parents essentially. And I was like, well, this is weird. So there's still this difference. So I began to start to feel more and more that faith was just really a personal thing to me, and that institutions ultimately were going to fail me. And boy, did that happen when I went to college. So if talking along too, I've got this internal dialogue going with myself in college and in high school, and I kind of share it with some people. I kind of let some people know that I feel this way, but most of the time I just keep it hidden because I'm not really sure how to talk to other people about it, and I'm also sort of embarrassed about it because it seemed in my upbringing religion was sort of something for suckers. It was if we were smarter than that somehow. We were we didn't need religion, kind of opiate of the masses stuff. But then I was a sucker. I was one of the suckers. And then also it didn't seem cool. It didn't seem like the cool, I thought it would. It seemed cool at the time, but then it wasn't that cool. I don't know. I had a really hard time sort of integrating like what's cool, what's not, what do I really believe, how important is it? It was just we're on YouTube, so I can't say what it was, but it rhymes with it show. Okay, so anyway, I'm in college, and have any of you ever been to Berkeley, California?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's where I went to college, and Berkeley's crazy pants. These sort of common areas, the sort of plazas where you walk through every day as a student, are filled with like people who are preaching. There's like a preacher next to a performance artist and a poet over here, and then some Chinese guy with a traditional Chinese instrument. That's perfect. And I used to love to just like sit down in the plaza and watch people and watch everything happen. And then this guy came over and sat down next to me one day, and I'd seen him around. Sometimes he'd be preaching, and then sometimes he'd just be wandering around, sitting down, talking to people. He sat down next to me one day. Really nondescript, ordinary-looking guy, kind of like balding white guy in his 40s. And he sits down next to me, and he's like, we just start talking. And he, like I'm an English major, so I'm really into poetry of like, especially like really into Gerard Manley Hopkins. Has anyone ever read any Gerard Manley Hopkins? He was a Jesuit, right? Tortured Jesuit, like couldn't decide if he loved God or hated God, basically. And I loved his poetry. And this guy was, we would sort of trade, like after a while, like we'd meet every week almost. Like I'd bring my lunch, sit down, and he'd be there, and we'd chat. And I'd give him a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem to read, and he'd give me some passage of scripture to read. And I was like, well, this is interesting. I mean, we'll see where this goes. And one day he says, why don't you come over to my house for lunch next week? I'm like, okay, sure. And so I get to his house, and it's right next to this giant evangelical church. And I was like, what's going on here? And I'd come inside his house, he introduces me to his wife, and then he reveals that he's actually like the pastor of the church, like the rector of the church, or whatever it is in like he's the director of the church or something. And I'm like, oh, okay, bury the lead, that's fine, like don't, that, okay. So we have this nice lunch, and then he's like, you want to read the Bible together? I'm like, sure. Some passage, and he hands it to me, and it doesn't matter what it was, but I start reading. He's like, no, don't read it that way. After every phrase, I want you to say, yes, Jesus, thank you, Jesus. What? After every phrase, I want you to read, yes, here, let me show you. And he shows me. He reads like every phrase, like not even a verse, every phrase inside of it. He stopped me and say, yes, Jesus, thank you, Jesus, praise Jesus. I was like, you know what? I'm not comfortable with this. I'm going to leave now. It was like the first good decision I made regarding my spiritual life in 10 years or something like that. And that moment sticks out to me because it was a real epiphany. It was like finally like yet another moment of people telling me how it ought to be, or people telling me how it is, and how I should behave, and what I should believe, and what the Bible means, and what the Bible is. And by that point, I'd taken a bunch of religious studies classes. I'd read a ton of the Bible. When I was at Berkeley, we read, when I was in high school, there were like 2 different classes that were Bible as literature classes. So I'd read like a boatload of stuff. When I got to Berkeley, there was, and during the gap year, I did this religious studies class, read every single, like compared the synoptic gospels to one another, and like found all the places where they disagree about things, and tried to figure out what that means, right? And then I'd even like taken the time to read Revelation, and like that'll screw you up. Is that part of the Catholic Bible? I don't even know. No, it's not. Yes, it is. I know there's like these other books. Like it's not quite. Anyway, so I don't know if any of you have read Revelation, but I'm not entirely sure it's worth your time. So, and I was also doing this thing in my own studies, in my English major deal. Like I was getting really into deep poetry, and and thinking a lot about poets like Hopkins, like William Blake, like Allen Ginsberg, Christopher Smart, And it occurred to me, the way I began to understand it, and I'm saying this right now because this is really important to me. The way I began to understand it, and the way I still understand it, is that the Bible and the Torah and the Quran and the Upanishads and the scriptures, or the holy writing of Buddhist traditions, all of these are attempts by ordinary human beings to clarify and describe their relationship to the unknowable. And I think it's important to remind ourselves, it's always been important to me to remember that these are unknowable things, right? And that your experience, or my own experience, I had these experiences where I'd be like, going for a walk by myself to like get closer to God or something like that, and I'd be standing like looking across this lake with fog, weeping, and like just feeling everything so deeply. And that's important, but that's my experience. That's not your experience. And whatever understandings I get out of my experience are mine. Whatever poems I write when I'm feeling that way are mine. They're nobody else's. And I don't believe that the prophets, Amos or Hosea or Isaiah, I don't believe any of them would say like, yeah, that was the word, that was exactly the word of God. Whatever it was I wrote in Hebrew or Aramaic or whatever, and how you've translated it today, like that's exactly what it's supposed to be, and that's exactly what it means, and take it literally. I think whoever wrote Genesis, right, wasn't there for Genesis. It's a story. That's my feeling. That's my interpretation. Right? I'm so tired of people telling me how it ought to be. And so then I just, pushed it all away. But I had an aunt in Berkeley, my Aunt Maddie, who, and when you're in college, and when I was in college, I was such a pain in the ass. I was like so self-righteous and so sure that I had it all figured out, and like I was smarter than everybody. And I asked my Aunt Maddie used to go to, she's a Catholic, she used to go to church a lot, and she would, we would talk about it occasionally. And one time I asked her, I was like, how can you do that? Because she's a liberal lawyer, progressive lawyer in the Bay Area. She put a Catholic church. And she said she would rather be a part of an organization and change it from the inside than be outside of it and be sort of ineffectual and rail against it. She'd rather be a part of it and just be a part of the church and help to change it in whatever little way she could. And that sort of planted a seed for me that has become, that actually took root and has become a really important kind of piece of my own personal philosophy about things, and what ultimately makes me perfectly comfortable coming to a place like St. Dominic's every week, or other almost. Because the genius that I see in the Catholic Church is that it has this sort of public face. There's this public narrative about Catholic dogma, and the reality is that the way Catholics behave and treat their own faith is a very personal thing, and everybody's pretty comfortable with that. Some people go to Mass every day, some people don't. Some people go to Mass every week, some people don't. Some people really believe that you should, sell everything and give everything to the poor and serve the poor. And some people say, you know what, I'm just going to show up and I'm going to take this in, and that's fine. And you go to El Salvador, you go to Latin America, and the Catholic Church sort of imposed Catholicism on this whole indigenous culture. And the indigenous culture is like, okay, cool, but we're going to still keep doing this other stuff over here, and we're going to have, in fact, instead of just this one Virgin Mary, we're going to have a few hundred virgins. There's going to be Dolores and Guadalupe and all of these other virgins. And the church officially sort of treats that all as just these sort of versions of Mary, but everybody who practices that faith knows that there's actually, who really cares about the Virgin Dolores and the Virgin Guadalupe and all of this, really sees them as completely different people. And that's all okay. So I see that as kind of the genius of the Catholic Church. And so I get to Cleveland 10 years ago, 11 years ago, with my Catholic wife and her very Catholic family, and we start coming to St. Dom's, and it's all very familiar to me because like I know half the prayers or more because of my experience in the Episcopal Church. I know when you're supposed to stand up and sit down and all of that other stuff. It's very mysterious to outsiders, by the way. It's all sort of like routine to you guys, but like if you're not in the Catholic Church, it's bizarre. Like you walk in, you're like, how do they all know to stand up? What is this? Why are they doing that? Like it's just weird. It's really like it's weird. But it feels like ultimately it feels okay because it's close enough to some things that I've done, and I realize now raising my children in this Catholic faith that I believe that they are going to figure it out for themselves. And I believe that, but they have this grounding. They have a thing that I didn't have growing up, which was just a tradition that is a family tradition. And I think that alone is really, really meaningful. And as they get older and they go off and do their own things, it will take them a while to realize how good they had it at St. Dominic, because they'll realize that not every Catholic church is like St. Dom's. In fact, probably most aren't at all like St. Dom's. So I'm going to look at my notes real quick to make sure that I'm saying everything that I meant to say. Oh, there's another piece of this too. I forgot that whole RCIA thing. Yeah. I said 2 conversions. That was 1 conversion. The second conversion happened. So the second conversion happened. I have 3 kids, as Joe said, and I think it was around the confirmation of my daughter. That is that right?
She didn't make her confirmation.
I mean, like first communion, yeah, right. See, not Catholic. I only learned recently that you make your first communion. You don't like just participate in it and do it. You make it. It's like you're actually making the bread. I want to see everybody make their first communion like pizza dough or matzo. At any rate, she was preparing for her first communion, and I was thinking, the whole family is doing this. Like I should think about it. Like, why don't I just become a Catholic? I already I show up all the time. I understand all of this. Like, why not do it? And I started the RCIA process and enjoyed it a lot. It answered a lot of questions. And about halfway through the year, you get to Advent, and I experience Advent as the intersection of it's like the intersection of Advent and Hanukkah, right? So you guys, how many of you have like a Jewish parent or any of you have like a Jewish person in your life at all? Like cities? Yeah, okay. So Advent and Hanukkah always happen at the same time, and you get to experience the similarities with the candles, right, and all this light in the middle of the darkness. But what it did for me was Hanukkah always reminds me of my Jewish traditions. So my grandfather was a Ukrainian Jew who escaped the Ukraine, a town called Dnipropetrovsk, in the early part of the 20th century during World War I. And he escaped because stop that. I see you guys. You're like, I'm gonna hit you. No, I'm gonna hit you. It's his fault. I know. It's always, I got it. Do whatever you want. I'm kidding. Okay. So he escaped. He left Ukraine on a freight train because he was Jewish. And at that time, Jews were either being killed in pogroms or being conscripted into the military and sent to the front line to die. And so he escaped on a freight train up to, and then a ferry boat to England, and then some other train to Liverpool, where he got steerage class to Toronto, and then snuck down to New York. He was an illegal immigrant. I like to remind people that the border that's really porous that you ought to worry about is the northern border. But you guys really don't pay attention to politics. That's okay. So anyway, that made my mom actually an anchor baby. No. It's only for the equals. Anyway, Advent and Hanukkah, and I'm thinking, and it makes me think about my grandfather, and I realized that I wasn't ready to give that up, because the RCIA process, it's a real conversion, it's a legit ritual where you make some promises and you renounce some past things. And as I've already explained to you guys, I don't do that sort of thing lightly, right? If I'm going to be born again, I'm going to be hella born again. And if I'm going to be, if I'm going to be Catholic, I'm going to be like the best damn Catholic. And that meant like truly renouncing like the Jewish part. And I realized, I was like, I don't think I want to do that. So the RCIA, it's funny because at the time, Lisa, who's running the adults education part of the church here, she felt that it was like a personal failure, I think. And I had to explain to her that this was success, right? Because the RCIA process is actually a process of discernment, figuring out what's right, figuring out what is the best choice to make. And for me, the best choice was not becoming a Catholic. The best choice was being true to my family, being true to my grandfather, the legacies that he left me, the suffering that he went through so that he could practice his religion in the United States. And so the second conversion wasn't successful. And the first one wasn't really either. When I look back at this journey, I sometimes feel some regret or some anger about that organization, that Young Life organization. And like, what business did they have doing that to me? Like, it's crazy. It's like, in a lot of ways, I think it's wrong. But I also don't really regret anything, because what it created in me is this deep, deep respect for the spiritual journey that people are on, and for people's own experience of religion. Faith is an intensely personal thing, and I don't think it makes any sense at all. Like, to believe the things that we say we believe in church, these things that there's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing, and it doesn't make any sense. And everybody has their own experience of faith. And a lot of times, that experience of faith is one of doubt and struggle, and that's okay. So I don't have regrets about it, and I've tried to let go of the anger about it, and I thanked my mom a lot for not killing me at the time. And my mom actually lives here now, and Father Tom has come to her house for Passover Seder, actually, and she makes really good brisket and latkes. But ultimately, I think I've accepted every bit of my journey, and every bit of embarrassment I felt about different stages of that journey, every bit of anger I felt about different stages of that journey. But that journey, the journey is everything, and the journey's not over, because today, this year, my youngest, Gabriel, will make his first communion, and he's pretty pumped about it. He said the other day that what he loves about PSR is he said, it's like school, but it matters. I know, right? So if there's a priest in our family, he's the one. So I think that's it. I think that's my story, and thank you for listening.